So firstly, I'm going to pass over to Dr. Diane Pennington, who is a Senior Lecturer in Information Science and the Course Director of the Masters and Postgraduate in Information and Library Studies at the University of Strathclyde, but is also the Chair of the CILIP Metadata and Discovery Group and is a CILIP and Scotland Trustee. So Diane, welcome along, and the virtual floor is initially all yours, so please take it away. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Sean. And on behalf of all of us, yeah, thanks for having us here today. It's interesting to see the range of time zones from around the world. It's always a bit great. And I'm also seeing students and former students. So hello, Alana. Hello, Serena. Hello to my former students who still don't mind listening to me after listening to me for a whole year. So thanks for joining us. So here, I would first like to start out with having Sean introduce you to CILIPS EDI Commitment. As a trustee of CILIP Scotland, I fully support this, obviously, and I'd just like you to hear from Sean himself about what we're doing in this regard, and then we'll go into our part of the presentation.
Thanks, Dan. And Kirsten is just putting the link in there, so I'll not go into it in huge depth, but I'd welcome you to all have a look at it, and do let us know if you think that we're missing anything, or if there's anything more that we could be doing on this. This is quite a new piece of work to make a commitment around this. We obviously have been trying to embed as much diversity as possible into our work, but we felt it was important to make a clear commitment to basically set goals for ourselves as an organisation around equalities, diversity and inclusion. A lot of this is in reference to the wider work that CILIP are doing on this through their Changing Lives programme, and mirrors a lot of the commitments in that, whilst also making some commitments that are perhaps specific to demographics and other considerations in Scotland. This commitment was set out last year and will be again reviewed in September. So we'll have a look at that and think, well, you know, what have we been doing right? What have we achieved, and what could we be doing differently? Some of the things that we have set out in this commitment is, for example, creating a role for an EDI liaison officer. So this would be a volunteer role that would be separate from Kirsten and I as staff, and also separate from the board, and would be a sounding board for any anonymous concerns that people want to raise, or just comments or suggestions that people may have. We're currently recruiting for that role, so if anyone would like to put themselves forward, then please do get in touch with us. Also, we have a Padlet, which is another place where people can put anonymous comments around our equalities and diversity and inclusion work. Some of the commitments we've made around that is, for example, in trying to increase the diversity of our board, and setting a target within that. And we'll be taking steps to ensure that when we undertake recruitment for our board, that we are keeping that in mind. And for example, there'll be things like myth busting sessions to try and make it easier for people who might feel that the board is not a place normally for them, to understand that it is a place where we welcome all throughout that. We're also going to be looking at our events to ensure that we are taking steps to ensure diverse programming, inclusive programming, and accessible programming throughout that. That's a challenge for us all, and I don't think anyone, you know, would ever claim to be perfect in that. So that's an ongoing process to ensure that we can keep doing that. Other steps that CILIP are taking are giving free memberships to people from different backgrounds, and we are certainly trying to support that as much as possible. The CILIP are working on an anti-racism policy, and we'll of course be backing that as well as part of our commitment. So as I say, yeah, this is very much an ongoing process, and we really want to keep going with this and get comments, and our board will be looking at this in September. So please have a look at that. Any comments, please send them to Kirsten and I, and we'll be happy to consider that. So thank you very much. And now to pass back to Diane to take it away from there. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. That was great. So I'm going to now pass it to Beth Shoemaker, who's one of our co-chairs of the committee, so that she can introduce the committee. Just to say that Karen and May are not with us this morning for very good reasons. I think it's 3 a.m. where May is right now. I would not be here either. And Karen is busy with ALA accreditation activities as part of the annual conference. But Beth, if you want to introduce the committee and then introduce the code as well from there.
Yes, good morning. Thanks everybody for showing up this morning. It's not quite as early for most of you as it is where I am in Atlanta, Georgia, but nevertheless, I'm glad to see everyone here. So our steering committee, which has a representation from the US, the UK, and Canada. Consists of myself. I'm at Emory University in Atlanta, and my co-chair, Karen Snow, who's at Dominican University. She's a library and information education professional, and also oversees their doctoral program in LIS. Karen is actually at ALA, as Diane mentioned, and will also be representing the steering committee on a panel, I think tomorrow morning. So Mei Chan is at the University of Toronto. She's the head of metadata. She is in Vancouver, so it's very, very early where she is, so she's not joining us this morning. Jane Daniels, who's with us, who's retired from the Cardiff Metropolitan University. Sarah Ferger, who's at the Joliet Public Library. And of course, Diane, who's with us from the University of Strathclyde. So we can go to the next slide. So just a quick background of the work that led to the Code of Ethics. We formed the steering committee in 2018. It was the result of some sessions that had happened at the American Library Association related to what the community might want in a Code of Ethics. Jane reached out to us after seeing those activities going on and expressed that she would love for UK representatives and CILIP to be involved. And then we reached out to the community, figuring that it was a good idea to sort of be comprehensive, and May joined us from the University of Toronto. So as we kind of worked through what we were envisioning, we realized that the six of us didn't have the breadth of expertise that we wanted to be involved in this Code of Ethics. So we put out a call, and were garnered over 100 volunteers to serve on 6 working groups to do some exploration, to do some literature review, and to submit reports to the steering committee so that we had their expertise and their knowledge to sort of play into what we were doing. We also had from our first draft and second draft, we had 2 windows of community input where we received quite a few comments that really helped shape the final document. So we intended to have this all done, I think in June, but of course COVID, June of 2020, of course COVID delayed many things. And our final version was released in January of 2021. And the next slide, Dan, thanks. So the Cataloguing Ethics Steering Committee website is at this address. There you can find the Code of Ethics, which is also in the ALA institutional repository, which anybody can access. So if you go to ALA institutional repository, you can also find it there. But we do have full text on our website. There's also an extensive bibliography on cataloging ethics. So if you're interested in some reading for yourself or a reading group at your institution, there are a lot of options there from all sorts of places. We've had a great deal of additions from working group members, and it's grown to quite a comprehensive bibliography, so it's worth a look. And if you're interested, both the first and second drafts of the code are also available on that website if you'd like to see sort of what the progression was in response to the comments that we received.
Thanks, Beth. So we're not making you work too hard at 6 in the morning. I'm going to pass it to Jane, and she's going to introduce some more about the structure and endorsements of the code. Jane, I think you're muted. Sorry.
Yeah, it's all right. I don't know why after all this time I still insist on being muted, but there we go. Thank you, Diane. Yes, so really, this is just a very quick introduction to the structure of the Cataloguing Code of Ethics. It was very important to us right from the start that this was going to be a short and practical document and a valuable addition to the toolkit that cataloging and metadata work really requires you to have. And as it says on the slide, really, the main aim is for it to inform and aid your decision making. So it's in 3 parts. Part 1 is the introduction. And I've just taken a few quotes from the scope there to share with you, because we did, when we put the draft documents out, we had some comments about, was it aspirational? Was it actually practical for people to actually look at the statements of ethical principles and be able to apply them across the board? And so what we wanted to do was just to stress that we don't work in isolation as catalogers and metadata managers, and we do need to have the support of our institutions or organizations that we work in. In that way, we can make sure that DEI is embedded right across these organizations, and also our particular outputs are reflective of that support. But we accept completely that it's not practical. It can't be practical in certain circumstances for people to be able to completely embed this at the stroke of a pen. You know, it's going to take time, and we acknowledge that. And every workplace is very different. So we do accept that every workplace is different, and that the responses to ethical situations are going to be framed by those local contexts. That doesn't mean to say that we can't try. It just means that we think about maybe collaborative opportunities here. So it's a framework for approaching cataloguing work. And as I said, it's intended to be a practical tool. It's quite high level. If you look at the statements of ethical principles contained in part 2, they are high level statements, and they are really intended not as a checklist, although I have written about my use of it as a checklist. Maybe I was in a particularly fortunate situation when I was at Cardiff Met to be able to do that. But rather, it's a lens for examining your policy and practice. So it asks you really to think about your existing policies and practices and how you might need to review and redesign those, and work with a number of partners, both within your organization and, for instance, with the companies that sell you systems or content or resources or even records. And then part 3 is the case studies. It's very much a work in progress. If you look at our website, there is a link there for you to be able to submit a case study, and we'll be looking at one that has been submitted in a little while. But it's important to stress that we really want this to be a collaborative and community-driven initiative, and people will learn from your experience. So I would encourage you all to please do have a look and see if you would be willing, based on the work that you've done thus far, to be able to submit a short case study. Thank you, Diane. So in terms of endorsement then, we've been incredibly lucky that despite everything that the pandemic has thrown at us, we do now have endorsement from ALA, which came in November 2021. And as Beth said, you can actually see the code on the ALA repository. CILIP endorsed the code right at the end of March 2022. And we have requested that the code is added to the CILIP ethics portal. We think that's the logical and best place for people to be able to discover it and make the connection between the specific responsibilities that we have as catalogers and metadata managers with regard to ethics in the sort of ecosystem that we inhabit. And in Canada, CFLA, they're taking, because obviously you have a Francophone community within Canada, so the code is being translated into French for the purposes of having a regional consultation process. And we hope that, all being well, CIFLA will be able to endorse the code perhaps at the end of December 2023, because obviously it takes a little while for the translation to occur and that to be rolled out. But also we have already got on the website a link to the code in Greek. So we, colleagues in Greece obviously took the initiative here. They obviously support the code, and they asked, could we do a Greek translation? And that there is a link to that on our website. And we've also had interest from South America in terms of being able to, or permission sought to produce a Portuguese translation. So we're very happy to support that also. And once it is available, again, we'll put a link to it on the website. Thank you, Diane. So this is just, you won't be able to read it terribly well, but just hot off the press. I had my copy of Information Professional just this week, and I was very pleased to see that the text that I'd submitted for the news article has actually been reproduced there. So there is a code there if you'd like to go off and read that. It does give you a little bit more information about who took part, the extent, and what our plans are for the future. Thank you, Diane.
Right, so from here, thanks very much, Jane. We're going to now hear from Sarah, if she's still awake and having coffee with us, and to give her some information about EDI within the code, as well as some individual sort of examples that she has from her own work as a cataloger.
Thank you, Diane. Yes, I am awake. It's almost 5:30 here in Illinois, and I'm so excited to be here with all of you today. So what we did is pulled some specific statements from the code that emphasized EDI that maybe we could start a conversation with, get you guys thinking about how this applies not only to CILIP but to your work. So statement number 2. We commit to describing resources without discrimination, whilst respecting the privacy and preferences of their associated agents. Statement 3, we acknowledge that we bring our biases to the workplace and therefore strive to overcome the personal, institutional, and societal prejudices present in our work. Number 4, we recognize that interoperability and consistent application of standards help our users find and access materials. However, all standards are biased, and we will approach them critically and advocate to make cataloging more inclusive. And statement number 8, we insist on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. We promote education, training, and equitable pay, and a fair work environment for everyone who catalogs so that they can continue to support search and discovery. As Jane mentioned, the language here is kind of high level, and you can see how this isn't necessarily a directive, but a lens to look at the policies that are in place in your own institutions, and move forward from there. So Diane, if you could. So that's all well and good, right? We have all these statements, but how does that apply? So the first example most people think of are subject headings, right? A big conversation in the US in the past 5 years or so has been the topic of illegal aliens and the ability of, or lack thereof, to create local, more inclusive subject headings for potential problematic subject headings is something that everyone kind of goes to immediately as an example. But I'd like to share, if it's okay, my own experience advocating for full and thoughtful description of non-English language materials in a mid-sized public library, right? So my community, the library that I serve in Joliet, has a very large Spanish-speaking population, right? And it's really easy for catalogers to kind of phone it in when it's a language they don't understand, right? You get basic, good metadata from your vendors and it's good enough. Instead, I think you should advocate taking the extra time to add in those, Spanish language descriptions, making sure that it's all of your materials are accessible. And this is also cataloging ethics. So it's not just, having subject headings that are inclusive. It's creating records, working with vendors, working with other people outside your department, perhaps, to make the experience of library services more inclusive.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. So that's really great. So I'm going to spend a little bit of the rest of the webinar just giving some different examples and initiatives and collaborations that are currently going on in the area. And then we should have plenty of time left for questions and discussion at the end, because we really do want to hear from all of you about what you think about what would be helpful. But so I'm speaking here as for May this morning, because these are a couple of slides that she'd presented in some presentations that we did last year. So We did one for CILIP ILIG last year. That's available on YouTube if you want to see that recording for international audience, because talking about how this is a worldwide issue. It's not just here in the UK or the US or Canada. And also we did one for the CILIP LGBTQ Plus network last June for Pride Month for the overall big CILIP as well. So you can find both of those talks on YouTube, I believe, or on the CILIP website. But these are just some examples that she provided last year, which I thought are really great. So I can't speak to them as well as she can, but I will try my best. And just for a quick intermission, pets of CILIPS. If you have any pets of CILIPS, come on, show your pets. She's here with me. So this was one from, as was previously mentioned, Canada is a bilingual country officially between French and English, but there are also there's also several different Indigenous communities which are called First Nations, and I used to work in Canada as well, and I taught cataloging there, so I'm pretty familiar with these issues. That there are Indigenous languages that have different ways of representing knowledge because they see and understand the world very different from, in some cases, from those of us from a Western background. And so this was one thing that not only do they have this, they have the Canadian subject headings, which has been sort of an addition to the LCSH, because especially things like place names and geographic names in Canada are not well represented. So they have separate sets of subject headings, but also for different ways of things that they use differently in Canada that is not used in America. But this one in particular is for the Indigenous communities that I mentioned around another addition to LCSH and how this relates to Indigenous people. And this is actually on the Library of Congress website as well. But this is just to show you these are some changes that have been made as a result of this particular LCSH working group. And you can go link to that yourself if you want to see more information about that. As well, this is one that is been a fairly recent development. It's called the Homosaurus, which is a linked data vocabulary for LGBTQ terminology. And it's really great to see, you know, as those of you who know me and my work, I'm a huge advocate of linked data, but it needs to work well and actually function the way it's supposed to. But the more that we can contribute from different communities that need to have, you know, the different needs and different representations available, the more inclusive we can make linked data. But for it all to work, we have to, you know, receive what we need to from different communities who will understand their own needs better than we will. So I think this is another great addition to the ever-growing set of linked data terminology that's available as well. These were some tweets that I believe that May used from last year, and Violet Fox which I just saw Violet Fox mentioned in the chat, who's a huge advocate of critical cataloging, which is a subset of critical librarianship. And this was from I'm so proud of whoever this LAS student was who talked about this student for reminding us all that deciding on the right term is difficult. Getting the proposal approved is on another level. And of course, this has to do with, you know, the change to illegal aliens, which has happened recently. There was another change that Jane and I were just discussing earlier this morning around the use of within RDA, if you're familiar with that terminology. Hopefully, my students hopefully are who are here. Former students remember RDA. It used to be recorded in a personal name authority record that when you had a record representing a person or an author or creator, RDA said you had to record the gender was a requirement, but you could only choose from male or female as the two options. But that has now been revised, thankfully, to I would like to say as a result of some of this work. So we are making progress, which is really, really good to see. This was from a presentation that myself and two other members of the MDG committee, Conchetta Laspada from Cambridge University Press and Emma Booth, who I saw is on the call as well, who's on the committee. And we did this along with Nettie from NISO, the NISO organization. We just did this just a few weeks ago. And so Conchetta came up with this general diagram of quality metadata, which is a whole nother webinar in itself. But really what I want to do here is talk about how I worked with Conchetta's diagram of showing how publishers, libraries, authors, providers, vendors that were all involved in providing and creating metadata at different stages of sort of the life cycle of a material, and that we're all involved, and we all have to be looking at not just the quality of the metadata, which Emma Booth is an expert on, working with NAG for the sort of the requirements for shelf-ready ebook metadata, and Conchetta, who is a cataloger for Cambridge University Press, the issue of, oh, hello, Mocha. Hello, Mocha. Mocha is here if you can see him. But I added ethics as a different dimension to this to show that ethics it relates to all of this. So we need quality metadata, but the ethics that we're talking about today factors into it because it's about equality of access, making sure that people who are accessing these materials have a way to access them. So not just because of paywalls, but also because of vocabularies, any other barriers that might exist in terms of how the metadata is provided and what we're describing with that metadata and if we're doing it appropriately, EDI as well, and then also value for money, which is a point that I put in especially for publishers and vendors, because as Jane was a pioneer in this area with Plan M, of saying that, you know, if the vendors creating the metadata for the books that either they're publishing as publishers or the metadata providers who are not librarians, if their metadata is not effective enough for people to be able to find their books in discovery layers or in library catalogs, and their books aren't being found because the metadata isn't doing what it needs to do, then they won't be able to continue their subscriptions because nobody will be downloading those books. So that's my plea to vendors and other metadata creators around why this is so important. So hopefully they can see the value in it as well, from a business perspective as well. So the DEI committee from NISO is really important, and I won't spend a lot of time on this, but just so that you can look at the link yourself and check out what they're doing. Their diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility committee. It comprises 16 members from 5 countries. Unfortunately, there's only one person from the UK on this committee. It is very North American focused. The one person who's on there now is from Emerald Publishing, which is good to see that there's a publisher involved in this as well. But they're looking at the policy of NISO to make sure that they're, you know, kind of doing what they need to be doing with that policy, and also, since it's NISO, making sure that these things are represented in their standards. And we've done some recent collaboration with NISO, thanks to Jane, again, as the immediate past chair of MBG, who started this, some different webinars, both for the NISO conference and again with UKSG just a couple of weeks ago, to kind of look at how their work with EDI and metadata and how that ties into what we're doing in the library sector, and also how that can help vendors and publishers be more involved in these initiatives. And this is a report from April 2022 that OCLC published on reimagining descriptive workflows. And we were very excited to find out that they cited the Cataloguing Code of Ethics in this report. They talked about, and they used it specifically within their report on what descriptive workflows could look like for the issue of inclusion, and how and whether or not the descriptive practice that we're providing is inclusive and sort of presented throughout. They talked about it specifically around white supremacy, because of the main systems that we use, like from the Library of Congress, what the British Library does, and especially LC, that basically that's coming from a certain position of privilege and power, but that countries around the world, because they're trying to follow standards and things that already exist, it's very Western focused and very sort of global North focused. And so there's that, as well as, you know, who holds the power. It tends to be LC or the British Library, the major national libraries, and how we can look at what we're doing with how we create workflows and how we create vocabularies and systems and classifications to let that power go and to go out into the world and to help build trust between other contexts and other types of societies that are not so North American focused. And so this includes, you know, it's a very challenging document, because the things that they ask for are very difficult. For those of you who have ever worked in a bureaucratic organization, if you worked in a library, you've probably worked in one, but how hard it is to get change to happen in a large organization, or if you're reporting to your city council or to your university president or whoever you're working with in your library, making major changes and helping them understand why it's needed, both within the library and, you know, whoever governs the library, can be really difficult organizationally. How workflows change within your library policies and how you do that work every day, and then developing yourself professionally, personally, getting yourself to understand, if you don't already, to understand what why these issues are so important, and then implementing those and adapting them into your work practice. So it's very, very difficult work to do, but very important. They've done a great job of outlining it. This is a book that has just been published by Facet Publishing. I think I literally got my copy last month. And I used it in my UKSG presentation, and it's so new. I was reading it on the train to the conference and adapting my slides to include it. I highly recommend this. There is the whole thing around academic libraries and decolonization has a series of it's an edited book from different academic libraries around the UK of how they have incorporated decolonization practices or working towards them in their work. And specifically the one that I drew from, obviously, is one on cataloging classifications or case studies from different colleges at Cambridge. And that's just one chapter in the book. And just as a quick plug as well, I will be presenting at a panel on decolonization at the big CILIP conference in Liverpool next month. And Jess Crilly who's one of the editors of this book, is chairing the panel. And there's really 3 great speakers, not me, but the other speakers who will be talking about what they've been doing at their libraries and so on, and sort of the work that they've been doing. So if you are able to come to Liverpool, or if you're already registered to come, which I hope you are, to please consider coming to our panel and contributing to the conversation there. But this book was, I think, a major motivation as well for including it in the program. So it's really exciting. So this is an example from that cataloging classification chapter in Jess's book. And specifically, this is a special collection at one of the Cambridge libraries called the Cartonera Collection. And I find the background of this really fascinating. It was when the government of Argentina sort of collapsed, some of early 2000s. And artists and authors and other creators were not even able to get like paper to write on or to draw on or whatever it is that they do. And so the Cartonera collection, which has a specific meaning within that context, Cartonera has a certain meaning to them, that this Cambridge-based library just worked on getting some of these creations that were available. And they give a really specific example of how this was implemented in the records that they've created for them, and enhancing accessibility and reflecting the nature of the work within the records itself. So if we look at sort of the 3 parts of the record, if you can see that hopefully on the side, the top is just the title, the author, first edition, publication information, very basic mark. It goes in a bit more into the subject headings and some of the other information that they've provided within the 600s and the 700s and 800s. But what was interesting about this was they said, well, this isn't really reflective of the collection or the creators. So they added 500 fields or notes fields that were written in the language of the creator. So whether it was Portuguese or Spanish, or as well as using the vernacular version of those languages. So it wasn't just proper Spanish or proper Portuguese. They tried their best to reflect, what was actually on the items themselves. So taking the actual, creating metadata from what was on the items written in that version of the languages that they were using to enhance that for, access for that population at that time in those communities. So this is just one of many examples, but that you can read in this chapter, and then again throughout the book as well. And just some more, again, our focus on collaboration and very recent initiatives in some cases that we've seen just come out even in the last few days, actually. Carissa Chu has written an inclusive terminology guide and glossary for cultural heritage, which you can see there on Google Drive, and she's also posted a very recent presentation. Arliss UK has done a series of webinars on cataloging ethics, and we were happy as the committee of cataloging ethics to be the first, I believe we were in the series of their webinars. And so they've had a great series, if you can go look them up. And I think they've all been great, but this one in particular is Carissa's presentation. One that just came out very recently as well is the Trans Metadata Collective. So looking at catalogers that working in the GLAM sector in general, and how trans people can be included more inclusively, it's a bad way to say it, but you can look at the best practices recommendations that they've put there as also. And just to kind of close this off here, Jane had mentioned earlier that there was going to be a mention of one of the case studies that has been submitted to us as the committee. And so you can read it there yourself, but this is just an example of how they were using the code to influence the actual practice in creating classifications. And so basically they took the initiative themselves to sort of entirely rewrite the history classification so that it wasn't quite so biased towards European colonization and so on. And you can read it yourself there. But basically what we've asked people to do is to give examples of how this has taken place in their work locally in the library. Crystal's very excited as well, sorry. And we've also asked people to add the statements from the code of which statements sort of map directly onto what they've done. And so just, now we're really excited to hear from you and take your questions and your comments. Just another plug here on our last slide for #Winspiration, which is another one of our EDI initiatives in CILIPS Scotland. We've had a couple of, we started our first, we had one from Amina Shah for with Winspiration and sort of the power of women in our field. She's, as you will know, the president of CILIPS Scotland, as well as our new national librarian. And she did a really great Zoom talk earlier on, and I gave a presentation on the iSchools Women's Coalition at the CILIPS conference in person a few weeks ago in Dundee. And so this Padlet is still available. So if you feel inspired to contribute to our Padlet of women or groups of women, or whoever has inspired you along your way to wherever you are in your career and in your life, we'd love for you to continue to add to this. I did not add myself as a Winspiration, although somebody did, and I'm very thankful for that. It was not me. But whoever has been, as I talked about in my presentation, the women who lit the way, and I think that talk is available, the slides are available from my talk as well. But anyways, I think it's a very empowering initiative, and just one more way that I think this fits into this and how metadata and Wikidata, as well as Jane is, really advocating for us very nicely, how Wikidata and Wikimedia can tie into tying all these different things together to get a better sort of understanding of what's going on in this important part of our sector, which I think impacts all of us, actually. So with that, I will stop and I will turn it over to all of you for questions and discussions. So thanks very much for listening, and thanks for coming, whatever time it is, wherever you are in the world. Thanks.
Thanks, Diane. That was brilliant. Thank you so much to you and all the other contributors for that. A really informative talk and a fantastic example of collaboration and global collaboration on a fantastic piece of work. So thank you very much. So thanks to everyone who's put any comments in the chat so far. There's been loads of comments and links in there. We'll certainly share the links, and if we are able to share the slides, we'll share them afterwards as well. If you weren't able to capture everything, then we'll make sure we share that. Do put a question in the chat, or just use the raise hand function if you would like to, and we will come to you if that's okay. Now, just to go back to one of the questions that came up during it, and I was quite interested as well. This is a great example of collaboration. Can you tell us a bit more about some of the challenges around, making sure that this was as consultative as possible to get as wide a set of contributions as possible? Can you just tell us a bit more about what the challenges were with that? How you went about that, and what more people could do to contribute to this in future?
I mean, I don't want to step on toes. Beth, do you have anything, or I can take it?
Go ahead if you.
Okay, so this has been a pretty common question. We are all, for the most part, white women from English-speaking countries that do have all of that power, right? And we were really aware of that. And so the first step we took was getting that working group, as Beth mentioned earlier. And we did have participants on those working groups from a wide variety of circumstances. In addition to that, when we put that call out for comments, we had comments from, again, a much broader series of backgrounds than just our working group, right? So the other thing, though, when we put out the call, we didn't do a background check, or we weren't the EDI police, right? We weren't saying, you're you're not representative of this group or that group. And so I think there's the kind of that fine line where you want to get as much participation as possible, but you also can't drag people kicking and screaming to the table. So that's part of the issue. Another struggle that we had was access and time. We are aware that catalogers are often short-staffed. We're all very busy, and throwing another potentially very big project like getting involved with the Cataloging Ethics Steering Committee is not possible for everyone, right? We don't all have the freedom to drop our day-to-day jobs and do this other thing. So there are a lot of challenges to getting that. So we did the best we could. We put out calls on every possible listserv, social media. We did like all the Facebook groups, the Twitter. We shared it as widely as possible, asked our friends and colleagues to share as widely as possible. And we think that in the end, we got a very large variety of perspectives and backgrounds, not only in our working groups, but from our 2 sessions of public comments.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. Now, just another question that's come in, and just while we're covering this question, if anyone's got any examples of how they've either used the code already, or plan to, or think that they might, or any challenges around how they think they might have in using it, then do put your hand up and let us know. One question that has just come in there is there an existing thesaurus or for anti-racist and intersectional terminology? Did any of the contributors or anyone else know of a particularly good example around that, or have some advice around that?
I'll just jump. Oh, sorry, Beth, go on.
Oh, no, that's okay. I was just going to say, one place, so I don't know if there's a specific vocabulary. I haven't found one yet. There are a number of different vocabularies that I think one needs to employ to truly practice sort of anti-racist and anti-oppressive cataloging. But there is, and I'll put this in the chat, or maybe Sarah can, there's a site that's run by some folks in the US called Cataloguing Lab, which is started out as a collaborative process to try and submit new subject authority work to LC to sort of change and add to subject authorities, as we know there are many that are still very biased, and to try and remedy that. But they also have a long list of things like statements about harmful language in cataloging and archival work, so that if your institutions may be interested in having a statement about that, there's a rich set of statements there already that you can use as research. And additionally, there is a list of alternative vocabularies with live links. So if you're interested in exploring sort of some different vocabularies out there, there's a really great list, and there's some that I was speaking about it recently and followed some of those links and had not realized that some of that information is out there. So that's maybe another resource that y'all could look at to see if there's something that would help you be anti-racist or anti-oppressive in your cataloging work, especially in assigning subject headings.
Thank you. And Kirsten, were you going to come in?
Yeah, that's wonderful. And thank you. Sarah's popped the links in the chat box there for them. So that's great. And we'll make sure they're shared with attendees. I was just going to add, I mentioned it earlier, Carissa Chu had created a wonderful, it's cultural heritage terminology glossary network. It's a Slack group. I'm going to put the link in the chat there as well. That I found also really helpful in terms of terminology. And I think Carol's also added that National Library of Scotland are planning a statement on this as well soon.
Yeah, thank you, and Joe, hopefully that answers your question. If anyone else has got any other examples of statements, then please feel free to put them in the chat or send them on to us, and we can share with everybody else. But that's fantastic to see that the NLS are looking at that. We've just got another question there. Are there any health-orientated cataloguing vocabularies that have been recommended, preferably UK-based? I don't know if anyone has any knowledge of anything. Diana, anyone else? No, if there's anybody else on the call that does know of anything, then feel free to put your hand up or put it in the chat. But yeah, that seems like something that perhaps could be useful if anyone is working on that particular area. Okay, so now I think there's a lot of comments coming in. We'll save this chat at the end and make sure that we capture all the links and put them in the follow-up email that we send out with the recording. I don't think I've missed any questions at all, but put your hand up if I have missed your question. So really just last chance for anyone to make any comments or questions just now. But other than that, I think we are coming to the end. I'm just checking just now. Okay, perhaps the metadata discovery group could gather information on UK thesaurus. I'm struggling with that word today, but yeah. So that's an excellent suggestion from Gordon and something that the metadata and discovery group could look at, I'm sure. Okay, so I think there's no more questions. So if there's no final comments from anyone, then I think we're just a few minutes from time, so we can let everyone head off to their lunch if they're in the UK, or bed if they're in Australia, or maybe back to bed if you're in the US. But certainly just wanted to say finally, thank you so much to all the contributors. We are delighted to have been able to share this work. It's certainly, I know it's a living document, and this will be evolving, and you know, I'm sure very welcome for people to contribute as we go on. If anyone's got any questions and would like us to pass them on to the speakers today, please do get in touch, and we'll be happy to follow that up with everyone. So finally, can we just show our digital, virtual, or reaction on Zoom to say thank you to Diane, Beth, Sarah, Jane, and everyone else that's been involved in this piece of work. We really appreciate it. I hope everyone enjoys their weekend, and yeah, thank you all. We'll see you soon.
Thank you. Bye.